Welcome back to week 3, where you guys have been implementing your projects. Just to recap section 1 and the imports and section 2 briefly. I'm sure you guys have done your imports and section 1 where you guys configured, where you guys chose the file, you guys chose the target variable, and you guys defined the top tier and the other tier. And section 2 where you guys loaded the data and you cleaned the data. Section 3 was the bias proof, which Manha and Hania have went through with you guys. And that's where you guys have trained the single model on all of the data. You've asked the model to make predictions on the new data. You've built a results table so that you guys can analyze the fairness. You guys have measured how wrong the model is for each group using MAE. And you guys have gained the bias score and of course printed the results and seen who the model is worse for, and you fixed the bias. They have also gone through section 4, which is the bias mitigation. So the bias proof and then the bias mitigation, which you have gone through with Hania and Manha. So section 4 was, training the inputs and targets together, splitting the data into 2 groups, deciding which features the specialized models are allowed to use, training the model for just the top tier teams and the other teams, and then getting the test features ready, using the right model for each test lap. And today we will go through section 5 and section 6. So section 5, this is the section where it answers the one big question. So after training 2 specialized models, are the predictions now more fair? So just like in section 3, we're going to compare the errors between the top tier teams and the other tier teams. But this time we're going to use the specialized model's predictions, not the unified model. So first we're going to measure how wrong the specialized model is for top tier teams. So over here, as you can see, this basically just calculates the error for the top tier group using its specialized model. Looking at only the test laps that belong to top tier teams, we basically are comparing the real lap time variation and the prediction from the top tier specialized model. So we basically calculate the mean absolute error, which again, mean absolute error is just basically how wrong the predictions are on average. And this will give us the new error for top tier teams after the bias mitigation. After that, we measure how wrong the specialized model is for other teams. And that's the same process as the first process. So you basically do the same thing for the other teams that you have done for the top tier teams here. You then compute the new bias score and you measure the unfairness. So we take the difference between the 2 errors, and if this number goes down compared to the unified model, our bias mitigation works. So if the new bias is less than the old bias, then the fairness has improved, vice versa. So if the new bias is more than the old bias, then the fairness has gotten worse. So this is the moment that our project proves whether the fix actually works. This is where we calculate the new amount of fairness. So the new difference in error. And then we print it out. After that, you go into section 6. So section 6 is basically the final report and the visualization. Basically for the report, you can print out comparison table that compares the unified model, so the one model for everyone, and the specialized model, one for top tier and one for the other teams. So here is the comparison, this section. So we have error for top tier teams, error for the other teams, and the bias, which is the difference between the 2 errors. And this makes it very easy to see which model has the higher error and whether the bias went down when using specialized models. After that, you can also print out the bias reduction percentage, which is here. And this basically calculates the percentage reduction in unfairness and prints it out, which you would see over here. So my bias reduction was 83.8%. The formula for that would be the old bias equaling the bias amount, new bias equaling new bias, and the bias reduction percentage being the old, subtract the new, divide it by the old, times by 100. The next report that you could also do is clearly stating if the fix worked or not. So here is that part. So success, specialized models, reduced bias. Here is the code for that message. So if new bias is less than the bias amount, then of course the specialized models have reduced the bias. And if it doesn't, then the appropriate message would print out. Next is visualization. We prepare the charts, so the drawing, the labeling, and the positioning, and then we prepare the data for the bars. So you're basically showing two bars for each group, one for the unified models error, one for the specialized models error, and we define which groups we have on the x-axis, so the top tier and the other tier, and the errors for those groups with the unified model and the errors for those groups with the specialized model as well. All of this section here does that for us. We set up the bar chart figure, and then we get the labels for the x-axis. We then have the errors for the first set of the bars, which is the unified models, and then the second set of bars, which is the specialized models. We set up the positions of the bars, the width of the bars. We draw out the bars for the unified, set color, label transparency. You guys can do what you guys want for this section. Draw the bars for the specialized model, do the same thing. And then set the label for the horizontal axis, set the label for the vertical axis, set the main chart title, define where the x-axis ticks should go, label the ticks with the group names, display the unified versus specialized. We add the value labels on the bars over here, where you loop through the unified model bars, get the height of the bar, which is the MAA value, and then position text above the bar. This is basically me just preparing the layout of it. You guys can again do as you guys wish, and of course displaying the final chart looks like this for my model. After that, you guys will have done section 5 and section 6 and have completed the implementation 100%.